New service has been launched to help Albertans who don't qualify for legal aid but are still unable to afford a lawyer. The Alberta Limited Legal Services Project involves 43 lawyers across Alberta who will be offering what they call unbundled legal services in the new pilot program. For the next 18 months, those lawyers will consider taking on part of a legal matter instead of a full case. The program aimed at reducing legal fees while still navigating clients through the legal process. Monetta, how necessary is it to have a system like this in our province?
I think it's incredibly necessary, especially when we look at those middle-income earning families. I think to qualify for legal aid, the threshold for a single person is somewhere around $20,000 a year, and for a family of 6 is somewhere around $40,000 a year. So that's a very low threshold to qualify for legal aid. And then when we look at paying for legal services, there's such a big gap. So this is a gap that needs to be filled. And I think that if individuals can fill this gap, getting the services they need from lawyers and being able to handle those cases, then I think it's a great step, a great first step to making legal services accessible.
Mark, what's to say about the state of our justice system?
Well, our justice system has been under a lot of stress for
a long
time, and legal representation has been a big component of that. And there's been, so anytime we can enhance accessibility and access to justice, I think is a very positive step. Ideally, I'd like to get to the road where it's sort of like universality in Medicare, or, where representation is just automatic. I know with youth, for instance, young people, they automatically qualify for legal aid regardless. So, I see some light at the end of the tunnel, and I think this is part of the way to get there, because quite frankly, sitting in court some days and seeing people self-represent themselves, it just constipates the whole system, and it's painful to watch, and there's a lot of error.
Greg, what potentially makes this an effective alternative?
Well, I mean, it's effective in certain types of cases, and it won't work for all cases. So, because I'm a criminal defense lawyer, I talk about those particular cases. If you got smaller cases like a theft or a fraud or an impaired driving or an assault, bundled legal services aren't going to make a difference because the case is too small to bifurcate or trifurcate out. But what it does allow is that people who are making a working income, who have some money, but they don't have a ton of money, and they got a complex matter that's before the court. I'll give you an example. Fraud cases can sometimes run on months on end. I've seen fraud cases run for a year and a half in some circumstances, and individuals simply are not able to pay for that legal representation. The state can put in all the resources it wants to prosecute it, but individuals are left on their own devices. So in those cases, if you can bundle resources, we call it a limited retainer as a defense lawyer. If a lawyer can come in on a limited basis to fight the fight that gives the client the best chance of success, for example, maybe running a bail application to get them out so they don't have to spend their time in jail awaiting a trial, or doing a charter application to get evidence excluded, that's a good use of resources, and it's a good program to have.
Okay, it will be interesting to see how these next 18 months pan out. One more topic for our panel this evening. An inmate serving a life sentence at BC's Mission Institution hopes to be the first Canadian to be placed in a federal penitentiary based on gender identity instead of sex at birth. Falanovi has applied to be transferred to a women's prison following policy changes under the Liberal government. In his statement to media earlier this year, Correctional Service Canada spokesperson Jean-Paul Surette said CSC will now consider gender identity instead of biological sex at birth when placing inmates. In 2015, Ontario became the first province to place inmates based on gender identity, and ensured inmates are referred to by chosen name and pronoun. Mark, gender identity is enshrined in the Alberta Bill of Rights. How should this carry over to inmates in provincial jails?
Well, I think this isn't about inmates' rights. This is about Canadians' rights, and just like the right to vote, I think that we're evolving our prison system to be more reflective of our Canadian values in our society, including, equality regarding sexual orientation or gender. And I think that, you know, my personal experience, for example, working closely with the Edmonton Young Offenders Centre and Calgary Young Offenders Centre, is that there are girls and boys housed on the same institution, and they interact with each other on limited basis. And I think that shows that those sorts of issues that people might have concerns about aren't really valid. And if it's done in a supervised, inclusive way with community agencies and that, I think you could adapt the prison's environment to emulate a community very much. And you look at Australia, or you look at some of the other countries that have prison systems, some prisons have whole families living in with them. So I think that those aspects that people would sort of get shocked and say no aren't valid. And I think that our penal system is slowly evolving and being more reflective of who we are as a country.
Greg, what would need to be considered to adapt to that adaptability?
Well, I mean, I'm not intimate with exactly how the prison system works in terms of how they segregate people, but I think there's going to be significant security issues for those individuals that are transgender and are housed in a facility in which is not their natural born gender. I mean, if you thought about it, I mean, if you have someone who's born a female and she identifies as being a male and she's set to the Edmonton max for her prison sentence, you know, I mean, this is prison. And I mean, I appreciate that we're Canadian society and we're trying to be progressive and trying to evolve, but this is prison, and these are serious people in some of these institutions. It's not a university setting. So, I mean, maybe it can be accommodated physically, I don't know, but I do think it's going to take a little bit of work to get us there.
So, Monetta, given those risks, how should institutions respond?
Well, I think we've seen other institutions in society respond and try to adapt how they function to the changing landscape in Canada. So the justice institution, and by extension prisons, are going to have to respond as well. And it will not be an easy task, but I think when we look at the danger of violence and the danger of mental health concerns that are associated with transgender individuals, that we need to look at it seriously and take this concern seriously and see how we can adapt to ensure that they're safe within that prison institution.
All right, we'll have to leave it for there tonight, folks. Thank you ever so